Everyone's doing all right? I feel like I haven't seen everyone in a long time. Yeah. We had the week off for the holidays, and soon we'll have week off for the Christmas. There's a retreat after that. That's another week. So you have to make use of the opportunity to come on Wednesday. In terms of this series of talks, uh, we're drawing a conclusion maybe tonight, depends on how far I'm able to get. So the series is part of the Chan liturgy. There are many parts. I've spoken on the Heart Sutra. I've spoken on the 3 refuges, the 4 great vows, the 10 vows and practices of Samantabhadra. They're almost there. So this current series is the 4 great vows. And I'm unpacking the 4 great vows through the 15 minds and practices. Right? 4 methods of conversion, 4 immeasurable minds. That's 8. Right? 4 great vows, 12. And tonight, the 3 gates of liberation. 3 gates of liberation refers to emptiness, formlessness, and non-contrivance. Variously translated in different texts, early Buddhism, also later Buddhism, sometimes emptiness, right? But the other 2, sometimes they translate as signlessness or formlessness, nimitta, animitta, in the early Pali Canon, or alakshana, this would be the Mahayana version, formlessness or signlessness or marklessness, featurelessness. And then the last one, non-contrivance, sometimes is translated as vowlessness, desirelessness, or inactivity, non-contrivance. So these are 4 wisdom teachings that undergirds all the Buddhist practices. Of course, in the Mahayana, undergirds the Bodhisattva practice. Without these 3 anchors, these are the unique Buddhist contribution to world religions, basically, to humanity. Without these 3, which are kind of 3 angles about the same thing, if you just practice the Bodhisattva path of methods of conversion, 4 immeasurable minds, loving kindness, basically you're just practicing to be a nice person, it doesn't actually lead to liberation. So what leads to liberation is the wisdom teachings. And tonight we'll talk about that. There are so many things to say about these 3. Many different approaches to talk about them. And I do want to make it relevant to your life because they're so central in Buddhism. There's a lot of treatises and commentarial traditions about them. They can be very convoluted, technical, and unapproachable. So I'm going to try to make it very accessible. But I do want to bring out the depth of these 3 because they could be unpacked in very profound ways, nuance. Now, in the early teachings, in the Nikayas or the from the Chinese, the agamas. These three are considered gates of liberation from the perspective of the fruition. Right? So they are states of liberation. Three ways to talk about liberation, emancipation. In other words, nirvana. So they're not necessarily causal grounds for liberation. So they're spoken of from the perspective of the fruition, cause and effect, from the effect. Right? There are practices in the early teaching that targets these three aspects from the causal ground. Right? So meditation on emptiness, meditation on silenceless, meditation on non-contrivance or inactivity, and so on. Right? So that you have to make a distinction. Sometime in early texts, they're talking about realized states. Sometimes they're talking about practices. Okay? But in the early teachings, there are basically three distinct approaches, three distinct methods of practice for liberation, wisdom practices. In the later Buddhist teachings, the Mahayana, they're entwined, they're integrated. And I'll give you an example. This comes from the Da-Zhi-Du Lun, which is the Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra, attributed to Nagarjuna. 100 fascicles, a lot. Yeah. And you also get a sense of this from different sutras. Because these are central wisdom teachings, different sutras have different interpretations of them. They have different tweaks of how they talk about them. So there are many different Mahayana interpretations of them. But all of them share a particular feature, that is, they are interconnected. And what grounds these three is, of course, the early teaching of all things are impermanent, thereby no self. And from the Chan perspective, the Mahayana perspective, or my perspective, impermanence is new beginnings. We don't get too stuck with the language, the apophatic language of negation. Impermanence, no self, nothing there, empty. It's just kind of negative language. But what they mean is the impermanence is new beginnings, right? From a temporal perspective. And spatial perspective, they talk about dependent origination, causes and conditions. Things come together because of causes and conditions. They're insubstantial. There's no thingness to anything. Everything is made up of something else, spatially, which I just call relationships. So these are the core angles that all traditions take. But the way Mahayana integrates the three is through emptiness, meditation on shunyata. So meditation on emptiness, samadhi, shunyata samadhi. And despite the elaborate conceptual, theoretical descriptions of emptiness, that we often come across Buddhist literature in English. Right? that everything is dependently originated, they're interconnected. Um, Emptiness is actually oftentimes misunderstood. When people talk about emptiness, they think of vacuity, of nothingness. They think of negation when we say things are empty. But the Buddhist usage of emptiness, if we don't get stuck with the language, just means that things are fluid. You know, things are insubstantial. They're not fixed. They don't abide. They can't be reducible to a thing. And I know all of us understand this. Right? The reason Buddhist teaching focuses on this is because that's not the way we tend to relate to people and things and events. We relate to others and ourselves included, and along with our relationship with other people and circumstances we find ourselves, as non-changing, fixed things out there, outside of ourselves. And that's largely due to the way that we're neurologically wired. It's a side product of the ways in which we are neurologically wired by our brain to produce an object. Meanwhile, the reality is our brain has never experienced anything outside itself, outside the skull. It's a mental construct. It's not to say that there are no things out there, but it is to say that what we experience is our own simulation of that. Right? And in order for us to respond to our circumstances and people and things, we're neurologically wired to make everything into a thing. So the subjective narrative notion of selfhood sees that as an object of perception, and then now we have to relate to it. You know? So the reason for the emptiness teaching is to point to this neurologically simulated, constructed perception to say that that's not how things are. It's not a fixed thing. In order for us to function, we have to see it as a fixed thing. We're wired to see it as a fixed thing, right? We're driving, see a red light. You can't say, red light doesn't exist. Red light, you see it as a fixed thing. Now it's time to stop the car. Green light, you go. So we have to do that in order to navigate through the world, but that's not actually how the world is. Right? Things continue to change. The green light, the perception of green, if you're colorblind, you actually don't see green. Where's green? Where's greenness? Right? If there's no sunlight, we don't see any color. If something's up with your retina, you may see another color. So how things are, it's fluid. There's no fixed thingness, non-changing outside yourself that's actually there. If something is actually there, then everyone should see the same thing because it's actually there. Right? See? So it's actually very simple. the Buddhist teaching. It's not some lofty, although Buddhist philosophers make it into very complicated explanation in history throughout. It's actually pointing to something that's fluid, that's relational. That's why I say emptiness is relationships. Of what? My sense organ, if it's not messed up, perceiving objects, giving rise to filter through my own garbage, right? Biases. So sense organ, sense object, cognitive moments of consciousness, perception. So it's a tripartite experience. Everything's relational. One aspect of that tripartite relation changes, the whole thing changes. If my sense organs are messed up, I may see red as green. If the objects change, I only see some person from this angle as opposed to that angle. I have a particular angle, but you see that person from another angle. Right? Where's the real thing? It's in here, right? And my own baggage, upbringing, habit tendencies, biases, right? So this whole tripartite relatedness of the ways in which things are constructed, experiences are constructed, is empty. That's what emptiness means. It doesn't deny like there's nothing out there. It's very simple. You come here, I give you a slap, you realize something is there, right? My hand, right? So it doesn't deny things. It just points to the fact that it may not be what you think it is. It may not be how you perceive it to be. So that leaves us with the practice of openness, of wonderment. Right? Ungraspability, unfixed. Right? Not try to reify. We know exactly how we are perceiving things. Red light, green light. We know how but then we follow the conventions. Right? But we're not reacted to it. Like some green lights, I know you have experienced this. Some green lights just seem to be a little too short. You know, some red lights seems like it's forever. Who is managing that? Like why is it red light so damn long? You know, and you start to be reactive. Right? So you're reacting to your own perception, your own expectations, your own judgment, and you're getting pissed off at it. So the practice of releasing wonderment allows us to be happier, right? Not be so caught up, not from the Buddhist lingo, not to give rise to suffering, right? Anguish, dis-ease. You lose your sense of composure. Right? That's where practice comes in. So working with our neurobiology, the way that we're made up, we don't work against it, we work with it, and then we learn to navigate. We see right through the constructedness of our neurobiology, the way we're filtering through everything that we see. That is the teaching of no self. There's no fixed. Self is such an elusive term. It's a confusing term. Western science have been trying to understand this term forever, basically. You know? Neuroscience is just an extension of Western philosophy trying to understand this since the Greeks, thousands of years. In Asia too, there's all traditions of religious, spiritual tradition trying to understand this. The self is very elusive. Partly is due to the language. Because it's in the singular, the self. Nothing is in the singular. From the perspective of neuroscience. They talk about different sense of self, which activates different regions of the brain. When you are engaging autobiographical narration, certain region of the brain is activated. When you're feeling something, other regions are activated. When your occipital cortex, visual cortex is engaged, and you're seeing spatially oriented, you see your body right here in this moment, and then you see other people that are there. That's another type of spatially oriented self. It's very different than subjective self or autobiographical self or narrative self or emotional self. Does that make sense? All of that just points to no self. There's no one thing. All these things actually run on automatic pilot. You don't need to be there to control things. Just like you don't need to control your heartbeat in order for the heartbeat to work functionally. And all of these things have a side products, right? The occipital visual sense of self, spatially sense of self, the autobiographical, the narrative, the emotive. All of these things, they produce different side products, and all of them relate to one another to form this sense of me, I, mine, the center. So what the Buddhist is saying is that that's a byproduct. That's not what Buddhism talk about, no self. So a lot of people mistake that. The Buddhist targeting of no self is rigidity, grasping, the tendency of reification of your views, your perspective. That is the teaching of no self. It targets that. It doesn't mess with your neurobiology. After your awakening, you can't see things anymore or something, or you have no memory anymore. Memory, autobiographical, it doesn't work. No, it has nothing to do with that. You see what I'm saying? So it's nothing aloof, nothing really conceptual, theoretical, philosophical. It's just talking about our sense of reification, right? Based on what? Based on side products. Like these side products. You could say mistaken side products, or you can say just very natural way that we are wired to do things. But because of our lived experiences of habit tendency and all the conditioning, we take all of these experiences as me, I, mine, and becomes very deeply rooted. Sense of self. I remember Zia, when she was a toddler, she used to play with this girl who was older than her. This was at Princeton. We all live in the kind of graduate student apartment complexes. this little blonde girl. All the parents, either the mom's side or the dad's side, they're grad student at Princeton. So we live in this large area, it's complex, and the kids have groups and play together. I specifically, observed the formation of self with Zia. It's fascinating. Prior to her usage of the word, this is this is me, she didn't have that, but she learned it from this other girl, And people refer to her, say, did you have good time today? Did you play with so and so today? You know, so all these conditioning reinforces the sense of me, I, mine in relation to other things. When she was very, very young, it was just that kind of a self-consciousness. Self-consciousness was absent. That narrative, autobiographical self is not formed yet. So it's just spontaneous impulses. They can't, kids under a certain age, they can't engage in abstract thinking. Meaning they can't conceptualize, oh, daddy, mommy's tired from work. So that's why they don't want to play with me. Give them a break. I can play with myself. Kids come, you see parents, they just want to play, and then daddy and mommy are tired and don't want to play. Just daddy's tired. So just intuitively, they didn't get the reward of attention. So they formulate this embodied understanding of not loved, potentially, not seen, not heard. You know what I'm saying? And then, just all facets of that. Very fascinating watching the formation of self and how toddlers begin to interpret things, how they experience the world, like their takeaways from certain experience, how they start to see themselves as things. Like when she was a baby, she used to look at her hand like, it's not my hand. It's so fascinating. Like, she used to do this all the time when she was young. I swear, she was like almost like born like this. So I have so many pictures of Zia like this, you know. This is a mudra of untying the knot, like speaking the Dharma. There's a lot of pictures of Zia just like this, photos like this. And she used to, when she was young, she used to look at her own hands. And of course, what they want to do is put everything in their mouth to see what it is. So from that, her own relation to her body, not attaching to it as hers, mine, there's no notion of that self-consciousness yet, right? To beginning to develop that, and then reinforced by the world and the people in that world, referring to her in a certain way in relation to others, so that formation of the brain. Fascinating. Right? You could say that mistaken identity, or you could say it's just how the brain wires. It helps us to navigate. Otherwise, you would be running into walls and running into people. Right? So all of that's not really the problem. All the sensory functions, neurological pathways, is not really the problem. It's that sense of identity, grasping, self-conscious grasping. That's the culprit. Right? Particularly the more we learn language, which has a very useful effect, but very devastating effect of reification, because language tend to solidify, objectify, bifurcate, separate between this and that. We have a label, a container for this, which is different from that. So that starts to format, literally, your brain, the way you see yourself. And sometimes a lot of problems that we have actually is produced by language. It's not actually a problem, because another civilization with no language for that, they don't have a problem with that. You know, the different identities, subjectivities, it's actually produced by the language. And people attach to that, identify with that, and then they're traumatized. There's a problem, they're suffering. Suffering as a result of the ways in which language works. How does language work? It discriminates. That's how language works. A is not B. Or you can have A and B, which is different than just A, right? Or neither A and B. He's still working with A and B. It just discriminates. It's not this, not that. So we have all kinds. That's, of course, on a very simple term, but we have very sophisticated ways we use language. So it just worsens as we grow up, as we grow. Right? Notions about ourselves, language that we have about ourselves, not good enough, inadequate, not pretty enough, too fat, too thin, too tall, too short, too pale, too black, too white, too hairy, all kinds of stuff. So problems. And what I mean by reification, identification, is we think it's real. Meanwhile, this hunk of flesh and blood, meat, in this particular culture, and another hunk of flesh and meat in another ancient civilization, the problems are different. Why? Because they have different languages, different way of cutting up the world and themselves, and creating different problems, assumptions. Right? So Buddha Dharma teaches us to see through the construct of selfing, othering. And Chan approach directly tackles words and language, the 4 axioms of Chan. This is a tradition not dependent on words and language. Right? A teaching outside the scriptures. Yeah, people can weaponize Buddhist scriptures to attack something else. Some other Buddhist tradition or non-Buddhist tradition. Right? So it's tradition not dependent on words and language. Reality, not dependent on words and language. Outside of scriptures. Direct pointing at the mind, meaning experience. Right? See its nature and become a Buddha, which means awake. That's the 4 axioms. So that's really the core. Now, in the sutra language, they talk about 3 gates of liberation. So emptiness, the gate of emptiness, is really centers on no self, the teaching of no self. Don't get too bogged down with the apophatic language. Right? To really, what is it talking about? What are the ways in which I tend to, like I said, what is the self? Right? What is Guogu talking about? Reify? Solidify? Identify? That is the self, not the biological, neurological function, right? What are the ways in which I do that? to reify myself and other people. That release that. Right? So how that manifests in concrete everyday terms is, how do you relate to your own opinion of things? Yeah, your own opinion. How do you judge people? That's a big one. So these instances is exactly the juncture in which that's the self that Buddhism is talking about. Right? The ways in which you reify, the ways in which we discriminate, we bifurcate self and other. What junctures are we talking about? Your opinion of others. Political, social, individual, familial. Your opinion, your judgments, another big one, your expectations. You see, those are the junctures. You can also expand the junctures to examine ways in which you do this through the juncture of the senses. Right? What are we seeing when we see something? So it's like a meta. You're seeing, you know you're seeing, and then you see how you're seeing this person. See. How you're hearing. What did you just heard? Right? Someone making a lot of, to some, it's noise. To others, is music, right? So what did you just hear? I hear a bunch of noise. That's that juncture. That's a juncture exactly how the judgment comes out. You see? So it's very concrete, isn't it? Sight, sound, smell, right? Aroma. You smell very delicious. All the association come on. That's selfing. That's right there. It's not to say, okay, shall I just not smell? No. You smell it, it's good, but you don't attach to it. You see the attachment coming out. So, oh, here you go. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thought, your views. Right? That's why I say practice exists at the junctures of life. It's one way, right? All the sense organs. So we can divide it up to like how you relate to 名利权位势. I always talk about this. Recognition or fame. You did something, you want to be recognized for it. Right? Beneficial. Things are beneficial, not beneficial. And then power. How you relate to power. Your right to do things. It's supposed to be your job to do this, and then someone else doing it. That could be a big one, right? Steps over your bounds, right? Hijacks your kind of sphere of power. Your influence, we have a new term now. It's a very recent term. It's called influencer, right? It depends on how many clicks, subscribers you have, right? You have 2 million or whatever, you're an influencer. You can monetize based on that, right? Sphere of influence. Status. Right? So you can practice at the junctures of life in terms of the sensory experiences, everywhere you are, or these particular things. That's when selfing comes out. That is the self that Buddhism is talking about. That reification, that grasping, that bifurcation, discrimination. And then to learn to release that. That's the practice of emptiness. At the working end of practice of the three gates, it's called the three samadhis. samadhis of shunyata, emptiness. It's not some fancy sitting there meditating on compassion. You know, you can do anything. You can practice that working on the breath. The way you're relating to the breath and all the things that come up while you're meditating on the breath, the way you're reifying, solidifying how you feel about wandering thoughts, how your mind wanders, how do you feel about that? That's the self, right? I want to get rid of it. I want to chase after it. The blissful state. Why can I get there? That's the self. So it's not a particular method. So if you're able to practice at the junctures of life, the samadhi of emptiness targets selfing and othering. It's not tied to a particular posture. You could start with simple posture, sitting, but you have to bring it to daily life, because that's where you meet all the power, influence, status, recognition. It's not while you're sitting, it's actually in life, right? If you're able to do that, I'm rewinding back to remind you of a context. I'm talking about why the Mahayana tradition see these three as interconnected. So if you're able to do that, you can take that accomplishment itself as an object of attachment. That's the practice of signlessness, featurelessness, formlessness. In the midst of form, you're not bound by form. So form refers to, or form, or characteristics, or feature, or sign, refers to something very concrete, like your attainment, your realizations, your insight on emptiness. That's form. That's Buddhist notion of form. It doesn't necessarily refer to like physical form. Everything can become a form. Right? In Guogu's language, a thing. Everyday language, we make everything into a thing. So the practice, the samadhi of formlessness, is not to make anything into a thing. In case you think you have accomplished emptiness, you're doing a great job at practicing this insight, right? You just made it into a thing. I'm not attached to this person or this particular circumstance or some idea. I don't have any fixed views about anything. I'm not projecting my notions onto people, expectation. I'm doing pretty good at it. That's a thing. That's a form, right? So formlessness refers to not a single thing. That's a Chan Zen slogan, not a single thing. It comes from the Platform Sutra. A lot of famous Zen teachers, they write calligraphy, not a single thing, right? Originally. Right? That thing means wu, or sometimes xiang means form, thingness. So that is the practice of samadhi of formlessness. So you see how that's integrated? Emptiness automatically relates to form. If you start to attach to emptiness, you're making emptiness into a thing. You're making your attainment into an accomplishment. You're making everything into a thing. How that relates to the third one? Non-contrivance. Sometimes translated as wishlessness, vowlessness, desirelessness. Don't get caught up with the language. Okay, this apathetic language of negation. The entryway into that is really talking about intentionality. intentionality of through body, speech, and mind. Because that is what unifies wish, desire, vow, including Buddhist vows. That's why great bodhisattvas like Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, for them, there's no sentient beings to save. They're not really like operating like us. I have to save all beings. That's us. We tend to do that. Great beings, there's no being to be saved. This is everywhere in the sutras. Why? Because they practice prajna, wisdom. Right? Prajna paramita. On the basis of emptiness, wisdom, they engage in compassion. It's automatic. There's no reification to form. They don't make anything into a thing like, I have to save all beings. We may begin like that, but with this intention, aspiration, or desire for wholesomeness, we begin like that, but we can't make that into a thing. So how that relates to the samadhi of formless or signlessness is not to make that into a thing that dictates our actions of body, speech, and mind. And the center of action of body, speech, and mind, what lies at the core of body, speech, and mind? Intent. That's why I say the third gate of liberation focuses on intention. That's why it translates to desirelessness, non-contrivance, right? Wishlessness, vowlessness, inactivity. So all these sound very pessimistic, but it's actually referring to the ways in which we relate to form, appearances, characteristics, features, right? The ways in which we make everything into a thing. Right? So not doing that while engaging. So the three gates of liberation, what are they? First one, emptiness. Don't make it into a lofty conceptual thing. I mean, right here, right? Right here. Whatever you experience, it's constructed, subject to change. That's what that means. It's about relationship. Organ, object, and that interaction between sense, organ, and object, giving rise to that cognitive moment, this tripartite experience. It's very fluid, very open. Neurological gate versus gate of emptiness. Second, formlessness or signlessness, marklessness, featurelessness. Yeah. Third, non-contrivance. Right? These three gates of liberation are not tied to postures. They're not tied to particular fixed forms. Formlessness, right? They're not tied to form. They are ways in which we carry ourselves and engage with the world. When we practice these three, we actually allow things to be. We support the flourishing of people and sentient beings. We don't have our own containers projected onto them. We see them and we're able to connect with them cataphatically. On the flip side of the coin of negativia, emptiness is actually fullness. Because we're no longer fixed into me, I, mine, the center of our world. We can actually see relationships. See? And we don't attach to the relationship. That's the formlessness. I'm all about relationship, making a lot of friends, That's attachment to relationship. Right? We don't make anything into a thing. Everything becomes very fluid, porous, possibilities. Right? So if I and then our intention, non-contrivance part, right? Itself is possibilities. So if I were to draw some conclusion about the takeaway, the simple way to practice these three, instead of getting bogged down with the technicality of the language, three gates of liberation, this, and that. Freshness, new beginnings, connections. Remember that. Introduce that to your life in terms of sitting, moment to moment to moment, open. You're not anticipating, you're not judging, preferring this over that, seeking, just open. Embodied experiencing. If you do that, you're in tune with this moment. Because emptiness, formlessness, and non-contrivance, from Chan perspective, from my perspective, is this moment. Every moment embodies these three. So if you're in tune with yourself in this moment, embodied, right? This is what you experience naturally. You understand? Like if you're sitting, whatever method you may be using, silent illumination, if you're sitting there, it's just freshness, uncontrivance, wakeful, embodied experiencing, non-abiding anywhere, not making anything into a thing. So as soon as the mind, because we have cultivated ourselves, habituated, brainwashed ourselves to grasp onto this, to identify with that thought, to chase after that, to get rid of that. Like, as soon as you see that, what needs to be done is just return to the natural awakening of this moment, which is free as you're sitting. Don't lose this principle. This is the principle. Freshness, wakeful, non-abiding. Or similar terms that, is freedom. Okay? So you do it in sitting, you do it when you relate to people, you can have all your memory. It's fine. You need memory in order to work, actually, to do any job, right? It's fine. But when things clash, views collide, opinions begin to oppose, things become awkward, cortisol starts to flush down through your body, relax, round, freshness. You start to see possibilities. You don't attach to your idea of how to do this job. Other people may have fascinating ideas, or what usually happens is, if you don't attach to your own view, you do have your view of how you should do things. Why? Why would you have your view? Because you have a history of lived experiences. You know how to do that, right? But you're open to other views. It's not that you just follow everyone else's view. I have no opinion anymore. No. What usually happens is a colliding of different views and opinion give to new ideas. It's neither mine nor theirs. It's like this third thing come out. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's much better. That's how things actually work. If you hold on to your view, then it's just opposition. So that's how to introduce it to your own life. Emotional experiences come. That's another big obstacle people have. Right? So I talk about meditation in daily life. What about emotional disturbances, afflictions, interpersonal issues, or just things that come up, the muck that come up? Same thing. Interesting, fascinating. New beginning. Let's go. Let's see where it comes. Where are you going to take me? Let's go. You know, that actually activates different regions of the brain. Because if you see it as an obstruction, difficulty, suffering, the emotional side of the brain, the limbic system starts to send out hippocampus, pituitary glands, send out cortisol, all kinds of problems. As soon as you switch that to, that's actually fascinating. You know, how does that happen? Interesting. As soon as you develop interest in it, you see possibility. The prefrontal cortex start to be engaged, not the stress part. Does that make sense? You know, so the litmus test, the gauge about your practice is how flexible you are. If you practice for 20, 30, 40 years and you're still like, something's wrong there, you know? The flexibility of your views. Like there's no clinging. You know, you're open to new things. You're constantly learning. And you practice wonderment. Everything's fascinating, open. So you'll be able to live more fulfilled, freely. So that's the emotional part. Release it, release it. How? Fascinating. Chan masters use different words to describe this process. Hongzhi describes it as, he says, cultivation of leisurely. Isn't that a beautiful word? Things come up leisurely. Just relate to it. Just remember this, leisurely. You're very busy at work, at school. From your perspective, leisurely. You completely change your, this is stressful. It's not stressful. It's exciting, you know, leisurely. Sometimes Chan Master talk about that. Hongzhi also talks about marvelous. You know, those of you growing up in the 80s, Saturday Night Live, you will see Billy Crystal always talk about You look marvelous. He's always talking about how marvelous, everything's marvelous. Yeah, the practice of wonderment. Everything's marvelous, interesting. Immediately release tension, stress. Or the typical Lingji approach is the practice of wonderment, not knowing. You actually don't know. You think you know something, it's happening, right? You're giving rise to stress, tension. Actually, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. What is it? And the door is open. Possibilities. Practice of wonderment. 高峰圆妙. If that doesn't work, he says, be a zombie. Things come up, all the gunk, muck, difficulty, vexations come up, just be a zombie to them. What do zombies do? They don't actually respond. Words, language, you chop off the arm, it doesn't matter. You keep going. It just keeps going. Sometimes Chan Master talks about being unfazed by things. Unfazed. Things come up, take a seat, keep going. See that kind of ability? Don't get too caught up with the language. Whatever resonates with you, you can use. See, all of that talks about possibilities, new beginnings, right? Difficulties that come up, right? Great desire. When we have difficulties, that means you have strong desire of something else that's happening. When you want to reject something, that means you're already grasping on something. When you grasp something, that means you already hate something else. So these polarities of grasping, rejecting, gaining, losing, having, lacking, right? In those moments, those junctures, release. Whatever works. Zombie, it's all good. Like what we always say, it's all good, fine. Or sometimes say, everything's workable. Or marvelous, right? Leisurely. This weekend, I had a very leisurely weekend. This past weekend, right? Leisurely. Or just look up on the sky. Open, spacious. That is your prerogative. That's your nature. Well, the clouds, the storm, the sleet doesn't really affect the sky. Okay, now we can entertain some questions. Yeah, Fred. Microphone, please pass. So keep that one on that side. Is there one here? Okay. Okay. And there's someone else here. Start passing the mic.
Good. Your meaning discussion of non-contrivance, because you said vowellessness.
The center of which is intention. Just gonna watch your intention.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what my question is, because intention to me is very much connected to vowels. So vowellessness doesn't match.
Oh, that's why Bodhisattva have no vowels.
Oh, okay.
We need vowels to begin.
So once you're enlightened, you don't need vowels.
No, once you're enlightened, you still need vowels.
Okay.
Bodhisattva is a great bodhisattva, like Avalokiteshvara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
To them, their vows are automatic. Automatic. They don't need to make vows anymore. That's intention. That's selfing.
I see.
Yeah. We need vows.
Okay.
A puny little awakening experience, that doesn't mean anything. You know, at the practice end of things, our vexations are so deep.
Yeah.
Keep making vows.
Okay.
You know. So
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. The very act of intentionality, directionality, there's something there. You know, so these are great bodhisattvas at the fruition end versus us. We have to make vows.
So if I can just follow up. So if you have strong intentionality and you have some developed prajna, does that mean that you don't have specific vows? You just have the intentionality of helping whatever the situation is that you encounter?
All
See what-
bodhisattvas have specific vows,
Okay.
right? But they don't attach to their vows.
Okay.
They make vows. As practitioners, we make vows, but we're not kind of like fundamentalist Buddhist, you know, stick to our vows and judge everyone based on our vow. Like, you don't have a vow, you're no good.
Hmm.
You know, like attachment. Everything, if we make anything into a thing, including our vows, that's not the practice of any of the gates of liberation. That's just bondage.
Okay. But isn't prajna sort of the natural wisdom that responds in an appropriate way, a congruent way to help others or to help their suffering?
Yes.
Okay.
That,
But that's also based on vows then?
that's based on selflessness.
Okay.
That's the function of selflessness.
Okay.
Right?
Thank
And
you.
what is selflessness? Don't make anything into a thing, right? Don't like I talk about the three gates, right? Your own ideas of things, your own containers, words and language, solidify things. When I talk about Zia, the formations of that, right? Or, you know, including our accomplishments, making everything into a thing, right? So when we practice not making anything into a thing, we're practicing, and we're very clear how we are, the process through which we're making things into things, and we choose leisurely. We see it, we expose it. So we have to, in a sense, we gotta take ownership of it. You can't say, just deny yourself, like, I have no attachment, attachment comes up, no attachment, no attachment. No. That's suppression, right? So you take ownership. Oh, I see, I still have that. All right. And then you practice leisurely release that, right? Could be not. My view, maybe wrong, maybe right. Who knows? So you don't touch it. You see it in a sense that's exposing, embracing, take ownership of it, but I'm not going to follow it. That's wisdom, right? Practice wisdom, right? I see my view at the meeting. I'm going to present my view, your opinion, but I'm not going to attach to it. And then someone else present theirs. And then a third thing come out, like a new view, solution to the problem. You see, it's not that you have no view anymore. Right? So someone attached to their own view against someone else's view, and that juncture, you see self. Aha, there it is. So you, at that moment, you practice. It's all good, marvelous, interesting, not knowing, wonderment, be a zombie, whatever one that resonates with you, but you have to practice it. That's transforming, right? Exposing, embracing, transforming, and then be free. Do you see? So you have to expose. You're not an idiot, oblivious to how you actually are creating selfing and othering. You see exactly these junctures of life, how you do it. And then the practice part is that you do you, I do me. I'm not going to follow you. I'm not going to follow vexations. You see? Yeah. Corey.
My question is about that exact subject. So when that comes up,
Yeah.
what really is that? It's a seed, right?
It's a habit, really.
It's a habit.
It's just a momentum,
It's-
substanceless.
It's tied to memory that's stored in the body.
Yeah. Stored in the body, habituated neural pathways. If we always think negatively, then that pathway is very darn strong. It shapes future the way you tend to think, right? It's a habit. So you form new ways. That's the practice part.
And we're training the body, right? In
Yeah.
that moment,
Yeah.
not to have a reactive, impulsive,
Yeah. Do you remember how we do that?
relax into it.
Relax, right? Diffuse them.
That's all you need to do.
Well, you have to see it. You see it, your mind is clear. You diffuse the mechanism because sometimes the body hijacks. It reinforces your view, right? You tend to think negatively about yourself, for example, and then you start to feel it in the stomach or chest. You have a bad memory, and then you start to be lodged in the body. Release it. You come at it to the body. Release it. Progressive relaxation. That's not all you have to do. You see it, and you choose. I see you, but I'm not you.
Is that called purification?
Yeah, it's a kind of purification, transformation. You see? So how do you see that I'm not you? Like I said, different charm master have different advice. You see? All the things I listed, marvelous, all the way to zombification. It's like that just means I'm not phased. I see you. I'm not oblivious. But what are you? Right? If you look into it, the wonderment is just habit. Didn't scientists, some neuroscientists, talk about like tension or things only last 90 seconds? Yeah, that's what they say. As soon as you see that, if your awareness is very acute, any subtle shift of vexations come, you got 90 seconds. You just see it. What are you going to do? After you face it. Yeah, that's what I thought. Keep going. What makes it last a whole day, a whole week, a whole month is that autobiographical narrative self just re-engages, re-traumatize again and again. We're doing that. What is that force? Habit. So vexation, stress, they have just short span. It's a chemical reaction. So we can come at it physiological, chemically, perceptually, practice, right? With correct view. The correct view is, in technical language, you're empty, right? You're formless. No need to act non-contrivance, right? I don't need to desirelessness. That's the technical language. What I'm putting it in is possibilities, new beginnings, relationships, or other things, freshness. You see, so you're practicing it. So it's not only physical. Even those words, those words will pump out different chemicals. If you see something instead of obstacle, it's like, that's marvelous. If you start by fake it until you make it, It's like, this is marvelous, If you do that enough, actually it is marvelous. Just fascinating how this thing just automatically, every time I run into this person, this reaction come up. Let's see how long it lasts. Let's go. How long are you gonna last? And then you're over it. Like this. So it's very humanistic, Buddha Dharma. It's not like all this stuff. It's very practical, very relevant to our life, eminently useful. That's Buddha Dharma.
What do you think about some of these practices that have a different approach as far as acknowledging the version of your so-called self that is actually feeling somehow victimized by circumstance and then attempting to share compassion with that version of the self?
Yeah. Buddhism have that too.
Okay.
There's different contemplative practices in Buddhism to talk about that.
Okay. Then.
Sending loving kindness to oneself and so on. Yeah, there's 84,000 methods of practice.
Okay.
But if you don't get the principle, tonight I talk about the principle. What is the actual teaching of emptiness about? What is formlessness really pointing to? What does non-contrivance mean? Right? If you don't understand the principle, you get lost in the dense forest of the 84,000 methods, and you're just running around like a dog chasing a tail. Because selfing is still there, we would end up with skewed conclusions like this method is better than that method. My tradition is better than your tradition. It's like stupid, right? That's because they don't see the principle. Why certain teachings were given, under what circumstances, and what is the aim for that? If you don't have these principles, you get lost in all of these different Buddhist jargon, theories, and methods.
Okay.
Yeah, so different methods of recognizing different parts of ourselves, sending loving kindness, transforming it. In Buddhism, we also have that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Neil.
I appreciate all of the support for cultivating one's own awakening. And we stop at red lights, we go on green lights, we impose consequences on people who fail to do so in order for society to function. And what I'm wondering is whether in the midst of all this, there is either a place for resistance or guidance about how to either conduct it or avoid it.
Yeah.
And I mean specifically, in recent moments, there's been a major threat in our environment that unless we agree to modify access and cost to healthcare, we're going to make people go hungry.
Yeah.
My conditioning prompts me to resist that.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time coming to marvelous as I sit in relation to someone who's perpetuating that kind of activity.
Yeah.
So where is resistance?
Yeah. Resistance itself refers to resisting our own selfing and othering. That's true resistance. Buddha Dharma, it could be said to be a form of resistance. Resisting to the cesspool of this world that we live in, run by greed, hatred, and ignorance. Buddha Dharma is resisting that. Right? So we begin with ourselves and we expand out socially, politically. Some people who are not politically inclined, they may not feel the desire to do that. Not everyone has to do that. Some people are more socially engaged. Some people are more neighborly or to themselves. But Buddhism fundamentally, sometimes I joke around with my students. I said, Buddhism is like the Buddhist teachings. It's like, how did I say it? Dismantling, like HGTV. They take down things, right? Dismantling. What's the word I use? Huh? Yeah, demolition, right? Demolition and rebuild. You know, so marvelousness is not something that we use to other people. Thank you for asking that question. Someone who's harming others, causing suffering, massive level, hunger, marginalization, deportation. We don't say, he's marvelous. No, we say marvelous to our own vexations. You see? And then we find solutions and possibilities. Right? So things are always changing from the inside out. Rules change. Consequences changed, also enforced. You know, so we don't participate in the enabling of people who cause suffering. We don't do that. But if we have our own vexations, that will be a block to find solutions. So we dismantle this, our own habit tendencies. We seek out possibilities. That itself is a form of resistance. You know, socially engaged.
So is it possible to conclude that is wrong,
Yes.
and I'm not going to be caught in that conclusion?
Yeah. First, we have to see our own habit, right? Vexations, that is wrong. That's not how things work. That's not reality as I see it. There's always new beginnings and possibilities. There's always ways to make new connections. There's resilience. There's resistance, right? So I'm free from that, so I can have a clear vision of what can be done and what needs to be done. You see? So we do recognize on a conventional level what's right and wrong. So it's not like no green light, no red light. Yeah, we know things have consequences. You know, there are people that cause suffering, people that enable happiness. And we support those, the latter. Yeah. It's just that everyone has a particular role they play. Everyone has particular idiosyncrasies, habit tendencies. You know, there's so many things that need to be done. But I can't do everything. For example, I do what I need to do. Right? But my students, they may be writers, politicians, lawyers, they may do because they're good at that. So I support that. So support everyone in ways that they can flourish, their strengths. You know what I'm saying? So we have to find that within ourselves. Yeah. Okay, online question.
Yes, there's one online question about your last talk when you talked about the vow to save all sentient beings, that this refers to sentient beings within our minds.
Yeah.
And if you would mind to elaborate on that.
Yeah. The things that come up within us, you can see it, answering Neil's question, it's a form of resistance. It's a form of transformation too, the things that come up. Do I follow? You know, the Buddhist usage of the word sentient beings, it's always tied to the cesspool of samsara. Right? Other beings who awaken, you don't call them sentient beings. We have a new word for them. They're arhats, they're bodhisattvas. Right? Sentient beings are tied to beings that are driven by the three poisons. That's what a sentient beings is. Right? So sentient beings that come up within our own self-nature, yeah, we expose, we deliver them. We transform them, purify them, right? We bring out the best version according to each of our conditioning. So a person who's passionate, transform that into compassion. Right? A person who is very critical, they always see flaws, but they're very intelligent. We transform that into the wisdom of discernment. You know? So transform them. Yeah. Those sentient beings. You can call it transformation, you can call it demolishing. Right? From the Buddhist view, I should say this. It's centered on emptiness, no self, right? So the other half of my joke of demolitionist is we demolish that which does not exist. That's the view. It's not something that's actually there, permanent, a thing. It may seem real, but all the things that come up within us already free. That's the view. We demolish that which that doesn't exist. The walls that doesn't exist. The house that we build, constructed. Take down the walls which doesn't exist. Sentient beings, we save sentient beings which doesn't exist. We attain Buddhahood, which doesn't exist. We make vows, which doesn't exist. But we do it. Seems like paradoxical, right? That's the marvelous part of it. Okay. All right. Have a good night.